A History of International Students at the University of Northern Iowa from, believe it or not, 1896 to 2015. In fall 2015, over 600 international students from more than 60 countries were enrolled at UNI. About 2/3 of them were undergraduate students, with 1/3 being graduate students. More than half of those students came from UNI's top 5 countries: Saudi Arabia, China, India, Pakistan, and Malaysia. But how did we get here? To answer that question, I begin with a collection of essays by Gerald Peterson from UNI's Rod Library, Special Collections and University Archive. Mr. Peterson gathered information from old records as well as student newspaper archives to compile his history of UNI's international students from 1896 to 1967. The Iowa State Normal School was founded in 1876, and mere 2 decades later, Peterson found the first mentioning of foreigners on campus among his sources. However, the first officially enrolled student came to UNI in 1907. Bedros Kebrok Apelian came from what was then the Ottoman Empire. Once on campus, he became, to quote Peterson, a campus favorite. He was involved extensively across campus activities and certainly made a name for himself. Peterson also referenced that one of Apelian's biggest contributions to campus life were his presentations and speeches on his home country, as well as the current issues facing that part of the world at the time. We will continue to learn that UNI's earliest international students were truly ambassadors for their home countries. Possibly the first female international student at UNI, Victoria Mevcheva joined the Iowa State Teachers College from Bulgaria in 1915. In 1929, an international student from the Virgin Islands may have been the first ever Black student to receive a bachelor's degree at UNI. Leo E. Stewart found his niche and support at UNI as an international student as well as a Catholic at a time when African Americans were not yet attending UNI for full degrees. By the time World War II rolled around, enough international students were enrolled at UNI that a dinner among non-Americans was warranted in the aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Students in attendance were both from Allied and Axis countries, and according to Peterson, they were united by the happiness to be in the US. He described it as good melting pot stuff. As the war progressed and enrollment declined overall, Peterson did not find much more evidence of international student activity at UNI until the late 1940s. In the later 1940s, some of UNI's featured international students came from Panama, Korea, Mexico, and Hawaii. Hawaii at the time was a US territory, and many students were of Japanese descent and were considered de facto foreign students. By the 1950s, Hawaiian students made up the first coherent country group of international students at UNI. Before and after Hawaii became a state in 1959, students from Hawaii dominated the international student scene on campus, to the point that they had their own student organization for many years. At that point in time and in the UNI context, anyone not from the continental United States was considered a foreigner. There were some concerns about racial discrimination when Hawaiian students first came to UNI. However, Peterson found that much of that fear was unfounded. He cites Hawaiian students becoming homecoming queens twice in the 1960s as evidence of how integrated and accepted these students were on campus. The 1960s also saw an overall increase of international students at UNI, to the point that for the first time a faculty member was designated an advisor for international students. Professor Alden Hansen. Seen here in this picture with UNI international students in 1960. By 1962, official enrollment was up to 22 international students, many of which came from then US-friendly Iran. With Peterson's goldmine coming to an end in the late 1960s, it was now time for me to begin my own primary research. Peterson told me that all Northern Iowa articles he used were archived online, so I could continue my story just like he had done his. Fortunately, all articles pertaining to international students were tagged as such. From the Northern Iowa headlines and articles, we learned that international student life as we know it today roughly began in the late 60s, early 70s. In addition to previous articles on foreign student involvement and contributions to campus, we now find a pattern we still see today. International enrollment at new highs mixed with challenges facing that ever-growing population. Before we dive into some of the details behind those familiar stories, let's look at enrollment trends since 1979. Since no electronic records were readily available until 1999, I went to the university archives to collect data from paper copies of UNI student profiles. As you can see, international student enrollment has increased tremendously over the last 40 years. In 1979, there was merely 50 students. By now, we're at over 600. Also important, in 1979, those 50 students were barely 0.5% of UNI's total enrollment. By now, international students make up over 5% of UNI's total enrollment. By the 1970s, we see a shift from international students merely entertaining and sharing their culture and being ambassadors to really being seen as an overall population that has unique needs and challenges. One case that is evidence of these new challenges facing international students as a whole is the story of a concerned Bartlett resident sharing the fact that international students can't stay in the halls over Christmas and Thanksgiving break. But fortunately enough, and because the student government got involved, by March 75, this problem was solved, and international students may, after all, be responsible for the fact that UNI has all halls open over all breaks. The 1980s are marked by incredible growth in international student enrollment. We're breaking the 100 mark, the newspaper covers it a bunch of times, and we're at the point where we're celebrating the international culture on campus. One example is Intercultural Communication Day, which is kind of the precursor to ISA's Spring Diversity Showcase that we just celebrated a couple of weeks ago. With the end of the Cold War, a new population of international students from the Soviet Union and then Russia is coming also to UNI, and they receive a lot of attention, as you can see by this front page coverage from the Northern Iowa. The Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990 shifts attention from Soviet students to Middle Eastern students for the first time. At the same time, all international students are going back into a more ambassador role around the university as International Services is promoting a lecture series by international students on their home country. Towards the end of the decade, the cycle of growing enrollment and the challenging accompanying more students from more diverse places leads to a campus-wide conversation on the friendliness and diversity in Iowa. Over the last 2 decades, international enrollment at UNI has once again doubled. Much of this is due to the work of the one and only Christy Marchesani. But even from this article in 2005, we've come a long way. Back then, she was International Services and International Admissions. By now, there's 2 offices with a total staff of 7 people working to support and serve the international student population at the University of Northern Iowa.